Hello, everyone. Oh my gosh. I hope you are having a great time at the IDIC Podcast Festival. I am so excited that we're here. My name is Letitia. My podcast is Interspectional, as you see listed below my name. And I have some amazing guests with me today. So today, as you saw, the title of our talk is Star Trek as period drama, adventures in the holodeck and places that time forgot. Why? Because Star Trek doing period drama is a really interesting pattern, almost trope, if you will. While we are exploring the future and seeing new galaxies and meeting new people, there's been a tradition of having times where if we can go into the future, we go into the past. And that is part of what this conversation is about. But I do briefly want to introduce my guest who will be joining us in this conversation, starting with Bianca. Bianca, can you say hi to everybody?
Everybody. I am just as shocked as anyone who knows me to be talking about Star Trek today, and I'm sure we'll get into that later, as I am wearing a Star Wars shirt. Oops. But I love period drama. I'm a major Jane Austen fan. If you're in the period drama Austen community or costuming space, you probably know me. And I'm really excited to come in and talk about this very specific nerdy thing, because it's the overlap of a lot of things that I really have apparently embraced in my life.
Awesome. I am so excited to hear your impressions, especially since this is kind of her first foray into the Trek universe. So it's kind of like, here's what we're going to do. We're going to start you off with the Treks that are the least Trekky of Treks, but yet the most Trekky of Trek at the same time. And if you have followed Trek, you know exactly what I mean. Speaking of people who follow Treks with a burning passion, we also have our favorite Dr. Luce, who was here on the third episode of Interspectional, which was Latinx representation in space. So she's already talked about this, and we're going to talk about it more. So, Luz, tell the people about yourself.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Letitia, for having me on as a guest. I'm super excited. You guys already know I love Star Trek. Voyager is my Trek, so I got to represent right here. And it's also really funny that period drama is also something that I love. You know, like Bianca, huge Jane Austen fan. We'll get into that later on. But I'm very excited to talk about this. I can't wait.
Great. Oh, first thing I want to do is kind of let the people know what were the episodes that we watched in preparation for this talk. So I'm just gonna show the episodes, and I kind of want each one of you, when we get to the episode, just kind of give like a 1 to 2 sentence like thought, mini review. How'd you feel about that particular episode? All right, so here we go.
Ready.
First up, Star Trek, the original series. We had to take it all the way back to the first one. So the episodes that we looked at were The City on the Edge of Forever and Spectre of the Gun. So as a Trek fan myself, I haven't like always really studied the original series. So this is actually my first time seeing these 2 episodes. And I was kind of blown away, actually, with the thought and detail that was put into it. And granted, yes, it had that campy 60s vibe for so much of it. But, you know, given what they were working with, I was like, there's a lot of things that came off pretty well. What were your thoughts, Luce?
So my thoughts on rewatching was kind of what you said. You know, they kind of took on some heady topics. You know, there's definitely a lot for discussion. I will say that I think I liked Spectre of the Gun more than I liked The City on the Edge of Forever. Maybe just more for a little bit of the message that I got from it, but I thought that they were both pretty powerful episodes.
Awesome. Bianca, thoughts?
I thought they were really interestingly done, and like they both do this kind of dealing with these ideas of history, because I think that's kind of my way of looking at it. These are a lot of thematic things that are impressions and ideas around history, like Spectre of the Gun and like this old West facade thing is actually, it felt like going to a community theater production, but not in a bad way, but like in a yes, A had so much budget, very clear, but also like knowing that, what can you do with that and how can you work with that? And I feel like because of that, I also kind of skewed more toward Spectre as like I was really intrigued by what they did and how they worked with that. Like City on the Edge, I think like there's some major topics. I think some of the things that they say and do, like, do they age well? Not necessarily, but I think that like not being afraid to talk about it and get into that is actually really interesting for that time and for what it was doing. So they're both, I think, doing something different. Like it clearly, I think like it was so different for its time. As like somebody who's watching it now, I was like, I mean, okay. I kind of have a skewed opinion about which of these all the episodes we watched were my faves, but like I think they brought what they could to these, and not being afraid to get into that is actually really cool.
Yeah, I mean, in the Gene Roddenberry in pitching Star Trek talked about it as like wagon train in space, which if it's accurate or not as a pitch is interesting. But this is interesting in like in this time period, Westerns were the thing. And so, or like right before, so to do something different yet in similar veins, it's interesting to see how they took on that concept.
And it carries on a tradition of that in sci-fi of being like the marriage of space and Western, but it's like Westerns as a genre versus like Westerns as like what it was actually. So I think that's interesting looking at like as the time period that we're going to as a genre versus the time period itself.
Interesting. And being that we're going to go to the next one, that's the perfect segue. All right, Star Trek Next Generation into the modern Treks, but not new Trek because that's an entire new thing. So we have Elementary Dear Data and Fistful of Datas. It's interesting that both of these episodes have data in the title and how primarily he's featured. Elementary Dear Data is a really interesting episode. It's just like dealing with concepts of sentience and consciousness that kind of doesn't come out of nowhere, but it's very surprising. And then Fistful of Data is interesting tidbit. Patrick Stewart actually directed that episode. So the captain was captaining that particular episode. Right. I have interesting feelings about that episode, but what's your impression of Bianca, being that we're just talking about Westerns?
I mean, again, like the Western trope, I think that like this is a really interesting place because there are layers. They did layers, right? It's a space Western going into a Western, but like specifically like through Worf and like his kid and like wanting to do this. Like it starts out there. And then it goes into this deeper thing around, which I think Dear Data does, where they deal with AI and like using these things and connecting and what the holodeck can do with like awareness and all these things. And I think like that was really interesting because it added this layer and thread through there that like unexpected, like for kind of like, okay, we're doing like a kind of time travel episode. We're getting into like the kind of ethics, right? Like we're getting to like ethics and like what's happening there. I didn't expect that like turn. I know it was like kind of set up at the beginning, but it was just like the deeper I went, I was like, oh wow, like we're really getting to that. And I think that the same thing for Elementary Dear Data, like we really get into the ethics and like structure of how that's working with the things that are created there and that kind of information. And it was really an unexpected way to explore it basically through genre. Again, to me, it was like through these genres, we are exploring a deeper issue.
Yeah, I mean, I always found that fascinating with Trek in general, but like again, looking specifically at their like kind of period drama episodes, it's an interesting thread of seeing like this is sometimes where they like make their statement, which is fascinating. They make their statement in other episodes too, but it's interesting that a lot of them are chosen in these kind of like outside of the normal plot episodes. Luce, your thoughts?
I liked both of these a lot. I mean, I feel that kind of how you guys have touched on a little bit. I feel like these two episodes, along with a few of the other ones, maybe just one more that we talked about, address the issue of like how holodecks gone wrong in a way, right? And then that kind of goes into what Bianca was talking about in terms of AI and getting into all of these components that, you know, we think we have control over, but we probably don't have as much control as we think we do, and they could turn on us, kind of thing. And so that idea I really enjoyed in Elementary Dear Data. And then the other part that I really liked about Elementary Dear Data was, like you mentioned, Letitia, the whole idea of sentience. What does it mean to be, right? And this is a big theme that goes along in Voyager, you know, with the doctor. And so they've addressed that a lot and with a lot of other characters in Voyager. So those were kind of the big themes that I hit on with these two episodes.
Yeah, I mean, and I think also what's really great about Elementary Dear Data is by going on this journey, you know, I've heard the phrase, I think, therefore I am before. But in going on this journey with Moriarty, I'm like, oh, you know, all of a sudden, instead of it just being a phrase, it's oh, you're talking about consciousness and existence. And, you know, to use a sci-fi medium to talk about, again, those deeper themes, it's like, you know, and in a way that is not scary, and in a way that and not being insulting in any way, but a way that like a child can understand that.
Yeah.
It feels very Wishbone in that way, in some ways, right? Of how they're taking the genre and like, it's just kind of like putting it at the most basic, how can we get this across an audience in like an hour less, but then using that to their advantage.
Right. Very cool. All right. Next series. DS9. Fun fact.
These were heavy hitters.
Yeah. Like I was just at BlurredCon and I was mentioning just these two episodes in passing. People were like, oh, the one where this happened, the one where yes, like these are like deeply buried in people's heart. Other fun fact, Avery Brooks directed Far Beyond the Stars. So again, the captained this episode. Thoughts on these? Starting with Luce.
I have a lot of thoughts. A lot.
I know, and you have to make them quick because you guys.
We do. No, like you said. I think one of the things that Star Trek does really well, and I think that this is why people love Star Trek, is that it hits on so many social topics, big things that are going on, and I feel like these hit on those. Past tense. Just because it's kind of like it's in our century.
It's like
right? we're living
this in '98. But that means we could have prevented it, but we didn't.
We didn't really. So we'll go into it a little bit more, but I just feel like these two are prime examples of how Trek addresses real life social issues, injustices, and throws it into there and makes it work.
Yeah. And just in both of these, it's such a showcase for Avery Brooks.
Yeah.
And seeing how, I mean, of course, you know, in Far Beyond the Stars, but also in past tense, because I guess I had just more memories of it. And so seeing it, you know, really again, I'm like, it's interesting to see him as Cisco take things on. In this particular narrative, and kind of what that means to him as a man, as a character, you know, as a Black man in this life. And also, I was reading an article that's saying how past tense looks at a lot of these social issues, particularly from the perspective of a person of color, as opposed to someone who's like, you know, well-meaning but outside of the experience itself, and how that changes the view and how it changes the impact. Bianca, thoughts?
Oh, 100%. Like this for me, like, and we can get into it more later. Like I am still sitting with past tense. I live in San Francisco right now in the year 2021. And like, yes, this is like some fantasy thing where apparently like, you know, you've got apparently like great things to use the internet at home, whatever. I don't know. But like, it's real. Like so many of these things were so real. Like when they had that line about like, this was the moment where like the country finally dealt with this stuff they'd been putting off. I was like, holy God, like this could not be more real for me. And like, again, this is one of those things that like, it literally gives me chills right now, but like, this is one of the things I love about this genre is that the ability to use this genre in this way, using this kind of meta layered genre on genre to make a statement and to say, hey, here's this real thing. We're going to use the storytelling to get you to really think about it. Oh, it was so good.
So good. And this episode is from what, 98?
Yeah.
Like the fact that it's in, what was then the near future. We are in that near future now. We're very, very close. And it's like, well, damn. I mean, it reminds me of Octavia Butler and, in her works and, in her writing, in the 80s, and people were like, did she predict the future? And she's like, no, I took what was going on and just extrapolated if nothing changed.
And I think that like, that's what makes these episodes so strong. If I was just looking at this as like, what are period dramas? These would be my top episodes because they deal with a lot of things that period dramas deal with. Well, like in the tradition of period dramas, race and class issues, the basic issues of your existence and your place in society in ways that I feel like the others don't really get into in the same ways. Yes, I think some of the ones around AI do in their own way, but like this centering that perspective, like that was 100% to me. Period dramas delve into that and understanding the rule society is made around you and your existence.
The rules make around you and your existence. I want to hold that for a minute. Whew. All right, next one. Voyager. These were interesting and oddly fun to me. Like the Killing Game, of course, it's dealing with World War II, but the idea of going through various aspects of our history and acknowledging that we had and still have a very violent history as humans, which thematically connects back to Spectre of the Gun when he's like, how do you get over your history of violence? It's all possible. Also, actually, no, I will get back to another Spectre of the Gun connection when we go to the next one. But I felt like this was just an interesting episode of exploring, what, and like you had like that parallel story of like the French resistance and the Voyager itself and their resistance to what's going on. So that was just interesting. Thoughts?
Yeah, I love these two. I mean, I love every single Voyager episode, but I found I'll talk about it when we go into other topics about it. But I felt like there was Killing Game is another example for me of how holodecks can go wrong. It fits into that little segment. Granted, it was not the computer itself, but the Predator, the Herodians, misusing their holodeck. And Fairhaven, I love because for me it was you kind of can see it being like just plain fun, at least that's kind of how it started out, a way for the crew to relax, kind of exactly what the holodeck is supposed to be used for. And then they go into these more, again, in-depth social issues, interacting with people, conflict resolutions. How do you deal with romantic interests? What is what are you looking for in the romantic issues? How do you deal with that? So I love both of these equally.
Yeah, I feel like it's one of the closest with Fairhaven. It's one of the closest that Star Trek comes to in general to like being like a romance novel.
Correct. It is for sure. I agree.
And that's why I loved it. Yeah. I have so many things to say about Fairhaven, but like what I liked about both these was the idea of using the holodeck to create, again, ideas of history. And I think that like that's really important when we think about how pop culture presents it, how we consume history, whether literally through this or through something else. Because I'm like, we tweak things when we make movies or whatever that we're doing that represents history. They literally have a conversation about should we have fog? It's too depressing. Like, they are making their own ideas of what these are. I think it's just something that's period drama. That's right there in period drama. Fairhaven centers a woman, like, and what she wants, and she doesn't, like, in contrast to the other episodes, she doesn't want to be the hero of the story. She just wants to be content. There's ethical issues about how she does that we can get into later, but like,
when she's like, I just want to know if she would have loved me back. I'm like, oh, we all do, Captain Janeway, we all do.
I mean, it's funny because, like, of all, like, there are, of course, ethical issues in Fairhaven, but what I love about them is, while that is true, her motivations and desires are so relatable. Like, the moment that she says delete the wife, it is an iconic watershed moment where you're like, yes. I feel you went a step too far, but I understand. I get it. It makes sense.
Yeah.
Just like all of that.
I screamed. I was like, oh, she did that? Okay, like, I get it. But also,
right,
the delivery of that line too, like, kudos to that.
Deadpan, dead ass, just like, go.
Yes, Kate Mulgrew delivered that like a T.
Yeah. So, and lastly, Enterprise. Now, Bianca, you know, being that you're new to the Star Trek fandom, of all of these series, Enterprise is probably the one that's oddly most controversial.
That's good to know.
And time period wise, this one is set before the original series, which is interesting thinking about North Star. Because with North Star and Tractor of the Gun, in the way that they're connected, because both of them are like, Prime Directive? What the fuck is that?
I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, hello? What's happening here? Why are they interacting? We're not supposed to do that on Star Trek. What's going on?
Yeah, so the Prime Directive in Star Trek is basically they are not supposed to interfere with cultures who are not capable of space flight yet and warp technology. So being able to, like, travel through light years. So they're not supposed to do that. We all know that Kirk is always like, what is the Prime Directive? Who cares? Ask for forgiveness, not permission, questions. But anyway, but yeah, North Star is interesting like that. I found these two episodes kind of really interesting. How they really, like, they really embrace the settings themselves, you know, like, not, and being that these are not holodeck episodes. So there's a strong feeling of place in each one of them, which I think is interesting. Thoughts?
I think that, like for me,
go ahead, Bianca.
There's also a really good through thread of, like, in that, like, the histories that you know versus the real things, and, like, the kind of vulnerability there, and how that's not necessarily there's one correct answer. And, like, for me, like, Carbon Creek is a really good lesson that I think this is a period drama specific thing for me. It's a lot of people that are really into period drama. A lot of white people are coming to terms with the fact that the histories they had to learn for multiple choice tests are not always correct. And they are sometimes erasing certain points of view, certain things that really happened. And so that was really interesting to me, the way that was handled and presented, because that's such, like, a concurrent, I think, period drama community discussion. And for this to be a thing that's already existed in a different way, discussing this, I really like it. And I might be now forcing my Jane Austen people to watch this, just specifically this episode, to sit with some stuff.
Interesting. Luz, thoughts?
I liked both of these episodes. The one thing I will say, kind of like what you had said, Tisha, it feels a little bit different than it feels more like the original series episodes did, in the sense that it felt more like time travel, in the sense that obviously, Carbon Creek, you can say, yes, you can say, it was retelling of a history. So in that sense, it kind of is like time travel. And then North Star, it was kind of like this dual thing, like they kind of really did travel back into their idea of, the Wild West, kind of, by going into this experience. So in that sense, it's more like the TOS episodes. I also feel like these went again more into those really big societal issues that kind of like the DS9 episodes, kind of went into.
Yeah. I mean, like, I have some feelings about North Star, to be honest. I mean, because
I got a little cringy.
Yeah. Because it feels like the way that it's formed, it feels like retelling the story of slavery, and retelling the story of particular story of African Americans when it comes to slavery. If we somehow were able to like take over and then rule over other people, which it's interesting to me that would be tried / attempted, but it also feels like the people who were writing were not necessarily people of that background, because what it felt like was, this is what folks are afraid of that will happen when the people who are oppressed are freed. But when you don't talk to the people themselves, you actually don't know what they want, which is different than what I think is imagined.
Correct.
So and even the fact that they named it North Star, I'm like, really? And if you don't know, the idea is like, the North Star is what slaves use in order to be, in order to go north, seeking freedom. So I had questions about that. However, that being said, I was also like, I see you wrestling with a larger issue here. I don't think that you were successful completely, but I appreciate the wrestling.
Yeah, that's kind of where I came from, in the sense being like, that's what I liked about it. Like, okay, it was attempted, but I will be saying it did really feel cringeworthy, because I was like, hearing the sheriff like explain to Archer, like, our people were abducted and taken from the Earth into slavery. Yeah, that's kind of how I felt.
Yeah.
You're like internally screaming. Ah!
Yes.
But then also, it's also, I think, also interesting through line with North Star, just seeing the different ways these various series attacked, for lack of a better word, the Western and the Western genre.
Yes, correct.
And how they hit it in different ways, and also the different themes that they used a very similar conceit to explore. So that was interesting. And I personally always enjoyed Carbon Creek. I find it this really adorable kind of fish out of water episode. It's kind of, I don't know, it's
another love story, kind of, right? You can at least it has that thread of romance in it.
Yeah, and also thinking about X-Files. X-Files. There's that the episode where they talk about the alien who comes to Earth as a black man to play baseball.
Oh yeah.
And like that love story of like falling in love with humanity as well as falling in love with the person. And I think that's just like really, really sweet. So yeah, just think about that. So those were the episodes that we watched, and so we're gonna go into more kind of general big picture questions now. So we don't need the PowerPoint. So I'm gonna turn it off.
It can go bye-bye.
Goes bye-bye. All right. So I did have some questions for you all that we can kind of look into. And we already kind of discussed a lot of this, but, still want to drive through it. So Bianca, Luz, what was your relationship to Star Trek and sci-fi in general?
I grew up watching TOS reruns with my mom and my uncle. Hi guys, I know they're watching. And yes, but like you, Letitia, Voyager was like my Trek in the sense that was the Trek that was on, during my formative years. Right. And so I fell in love with that. Sci-fi I've always loved. Again, X-Files also, just because I feel like that genre can give you so much freedom to do, honestly, whatever you want. You don't have to really answer anybody. You can be like, hey, is this sci-fi? So I love that about it. I think that was the question, right?
Yeah. Just kind of your intro to sci-fi and Trek. Bianca, what about you?
I will give you the real talk about my introduction to Trek, which was, I was maybe 4 or 5. My godmother was watching it, and my grandma from deep South Alabama was like, you can't watch that because people cut their ears and that's bad for you. And like, I literally, this is my grandma, but I had no context for this until I saw the Chris Pine Star Trek, and I was like, what did I grow up with? One of the many moments of my life where I was like, why did I not question this more? So my grandma like 100% did everything she could to like have me not be into sci-fi and fantasy. Too bad for her. Too bad for her. So
that backfired, Bianca.
I mean, like,
it backfired.
Yeah, it 100% backfired. That's like the context. So like I spent a majority of my life like with this weird baggage around like I'm not supposed to watch this thing. And then I was like, wait, no. And so I've watched some Discovery, and Lower Decks I think was the actual thing. Shamelessly, I'm trash. My pathway to Trek is not at all traditional. And then after this, it's been really fun to kind of get this sampler pattern through period dramas. And I'm just like, oh, I kind of like can see like the places that I would really enjoy watching more. But yeah, I got into Star Wars as a teenager. And that for me was big because like women in like those worlds, in like the books specifically, were really empowered and can be powerful and do all this like really cool fighting and everything. Anyway, like that was really cool for me because I found the kind of worlds that I was more happy with and like the reading in my classrooms, if I'm being honest. Yeah. And like for me, like the books were like a gateway into getting deeper into the genre and really being like, I see myself here. I see like even steampunk, there's a lot of women-centered stories there that I'm like, I really appreciate like the centering of different things. So it's been a very interesting pathway to getting into the genre.
Yeah, no, and I think it's interesting. This is kind of relevant, but not. While I was into sci-fi before then, around like my teen years, I was really into Farscape. And Farscape, for those know, has a plethora of really interesting aliens. And my mother, for the longest time, called it the show with the blue lady. Because he had, someone who's entirely blue, and it was just like, wow, this is odd. And I feel like sometimes when it comes to science fiction, just in general, if you're like, oh, there's something interesting, or it's something like, this is strange, what are you doing with this strangeness? So it's interesting how that can play to whether or not we feel like we can embrace things that are different, or embrace honestly even people that are different. Because I feel like sometimes sci-fi helps with that. Because like, look, if I feel like I can connect with an android and someone with tentacles and someone who's like, a freaking Muppet, I can probably connect with someone who literally just has slightly different facial features than me and is a different hue. Like that doesn't feel like a big leap. So yeah, that's interesting. And similar to with Luz, my introduction to Trek was really my grandfather watching Next Generation. And then I found Voyager when I was like 13, 14. And I was like, women captain, badass other women like being awesome. Yeah, I'm here all day. Just, yeah.
Yep. Love it.
So of the episodes that we watched, do you have a favorite and why?
Well, my favorite will have to definitely be Killing Game. Only because I love Voyager. I love Volana Torres. I love Captain Janeway. Anyway, you get the point. But I do like I like their spin on, like I think Bianca mentioned it also, the multi-layered aspect of it. You know, like they're playing this game, this resistance within the holodeck, but then on the outside there was also, or was that you, Letitia? I can't remember. I'm sorry. But I like that play on it. I like the fact that we have to, it kind of goes more in depth into humanity and its evilness in the sense, you know, like the Herodians were going through and they're like, wow, I found this awesome period. Awesome for them because they're like, hey, we can hunt prey, you know, and it's essentially what that time period was. So I like that part of it. And I liked how, and I kind of liked how it had that twist on it where beginning of the episodes, they were these characters that they had to, you know, they didn't know that they were really the Star Trek crew, Voyager crew. And then halfway in, they still had to pretend. So it was kind of like acting within the acting. So I just like the multi-layered aspects of it. And I just love Voyager. I'm sorry, shamelessly.
Absolutely. And it's also I feel like one of the few episodes, it's a handful, where Harry Kim gets a solid amount of shine.
Yes. Yes.
So
he and the Doctor help save everybody. Love it.
Yeah. So like I love that aspect of it. And then there's the interesting play-by-play when you have the like Lieutenant Hiroshin who was being convinced by the Nazi hologram to go against his commanding officer. So like it's this really fascinating aspect of, you know, a philosophy or a thought process which unfortunately is not as past as we'd like it to be, having an influence on what is there present.
Correct. Yeah, I don't think I ever like thought about it that way, but yeah, I never focused on it. So many things you can find out.
So many. Bianca, what about you? What was your favorite of the episodes we watched and why?
Honestly, I think through this, I'm going to watch Voyager next because I really liked it. Like, I don't know other people's opinions. I'm not going to look on the internet. I don't care because I actually really enjoyed it. I also really like Deep Space Nine for other things, but like Fairhaven is so different in this collection of things. Again, to me, it was like, it doesn't center this kind of, I have to go on this heroic journey. It centers this woman just wanting contentment. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but I actually really enjoy that and exploring that and exploring also what that means. Honestly, like looking at it in the current context, I'd be like, there's a little bit of lessons on white feminism there. But that's for a different day, but it's there. Like, I think there's like the multitude of layers, you know, when she's literally looking and she's just like, so what? It's a hologram as she's talking to like somebody that's like a hologram. And I'm just like, whoa, like you literally are centering your own comfort. And like, for better or for worse, that's what that is. And I think that's actually really interesting because I think Kirk centers his own comfort in many ways.
That's his entire character.
But like watching what that means for those two characters, I think is super interesting. And again, like the intensity of like the commitment to delete the wife, I'm just like, it's one of those things that I think, you know, you kind of go along, you're like, is this kind of an Austen or a Bronte? And it goes into like full on kind of like Bronte, I'm getting dramatic, I'm killing things, like I'm making this kind of like, as much as I tried to make this idyllic, like little pastoral idea, there can still be some really gothic topics that I'm like, there's gothic there, like around this like hidden disappeared wife. And I'm also just a sucker for like a bodice ripper type thing and using a bodice ripper to do something fun. Right.
And what's interesting is that they don't actually show it, though they describe it, how they have, and Madame blanking on his name, the holodeck character, that he's literally climbing up a tree and screaming her name out into the ether. Like, oh my God. You know, like that's so intense. That's so like, you know, wow. And Janeway goes through a lot. And it was interesting you mentioned both Janeway and Kirk because they are both captains.
Mm-hmm.
And so having that level of you know, authority over the people who are around you, and how do you find possible companionship, you know, when you have all of this responsibility, you know, and it isn't necessary, and it isn't just like, oh, I can't because I'm blankety blank. It's like, no, my job is literally me having authority over other people. So messing with those other people is kind of an ethical dilemma.
Yeah. And I think that's really critical. Like in period drama, the relationships are so much also bent on power. Like the epitome of this is the Darcy Elizabeth thing, where he's literally like, I cannot, like, it's going to be shameful for me to marry you because of your class. And it's like, those are real things that are brought to period dramas in every single like marriage or courtship. And I think that's there when you have a captain that has power going into these spaces that they are in some way outranking or outpowering somebody else.
Yeah. What I loved about Fairhaven also is that conversation that Janeway has with the doctor in the hallway. And I kind of took that as how we interact with each other in real life. You know, he's kind of teaching her that lesson. Like, you know, that is what a relationship is. Part of that relationship is, you know, not learning to like people, you know, in spite of their what you consider their fault, but learning how to deal with that conflict resolution, learning to accept something about somebody in any kind of social interactions that we have with people, even your friends, you know, your kids. And so I felt like that was such an important lesson. And in the end, you know, I feel like Janeway understood that. And then it was kind of, she was coming around full circle, and where at the end, she was like, you know, computer, don't give Janeway access to this program anymore, because she understood that if I am really going to have to develop a relationship or romance with someone, I can't always be like, don't like that, computer, delete.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, and that's like a lesson for so many. And so it's just like, yeah, we have to, you know, kind of think about that. And you did talk a little bit about period drama. So I did want to go in very, very briefly. What is your relationships to period drama that you're kind of bringing to the table? I know I'm asking you to make this short, which is a ridiculous request, but go.
I'll go first because mine is shorter. I know for sure that mine is shorter than Bianca's. So I will go first. But my love of period drama comes from essentially every medium. You know, I fell in love with Austen as a teenager. All her books speak to me very, very much. Then from there, it went on to more broader, in the sense that other authors, historical fiction is my favorite genre of books to read. And I will watch any kind of TV, movie that is set in a period that is not our own. There you go.
Take
it from there.
I love historical drama. Like my great grandma, she had Dr. Quinn on all the time. They loved watching
Dr. Quinn. Oh,
like that was my first intro, and that's kind of, you know, one of those things that, like, just like Days of Our Lives, kind of helped me really understand a lot of things later in life. But like
I really now decided that Michaela Quinn is Janeway's ancestor. I just decided that.
I love that.
We made it.
And Sully. Oh,
I believe that. But yeah, I fell in love with Austen in a lot of similar ways because, like, it's so relatable. I saw so much of so many people or myself in those scenarios in the book. And since then, you know, I literally learned how to, like, change my IP address to watch Downton Abbey. Like, I'm a nerd. Like, I will do some stuff for period dramas because that's where I am with that. But I think, like, for me, especially right now, we're in a really exciting time. Like, Bridgerton is changing everything about period dramas. And if you aren't paying attention to that, you should be. I'm excited to see what that could also mean potentially for this space around, like, the sci-fi versions of things and, like, how we delve into histories there. when you have something, again, to me, it's multiple lenses, it's multiple layers. It's our ideas of history, and our ideas of history are actually a major reflection of our current periods, I'd argue, a lot of the time. And I'm so intrigued by where that's going to go.
Same. I mean, and I continually make the argument that like period drama and sci-fi in many ways the same thing. Just like we're going to dump you into a new world with all of these new social things. You're going to dress in a particular way and off you go for your adventure. I'm like, yeah, they're the same thing. Were there any common thread that you feel like you observed through the episodes that we watched?
Oh man, there's so many, but I feel like one particular thread that I found that I could connect to all of them was kind of sacrificing your personal wins, your personal goals for the betterment of everybody else. Yeah. So, for example, I was trying to find a way to connect. Oh, okay, I did. I remember. I'm sorry, my brain. Even in Fairhaven, right? Janeway has to make that decision. It was kind of obvious where Kim says to her, "We have, where they're trying to they're in that, they're going through that turbulence, and she has to say, okay, we're sacrificing Fairhaven. My love interest might be gone, but it's for the betterment of the crew." Yeah, that's a kind of vain example, but even in Fairhaven, they found a way to make it work.
Like for me, I think that again, there's a really interesting idea around like the histories we make versus the histories that were, and like what we do with those, and also how we use those for our own. Like if we're playing in them, what does that mean? Like even the data story, right? Like what does it mean when we're playing in history? When these are real histories with real impacts. And I think that like that's really important for period drama because people try to use those things as escapism a lot of time. And you can't escape facts. You can't escape context. You really like, I mean, you can try, but like, I think that the lessons in those were like that idea of going into something being like, no, I don't have to understand the implications of it. And it being like, actually you do, because it's going to keep chasing you. It's going to keep like haunting your steps until you do. And I think like that was really interesting. And also I think a really kind of critical thing to think about on that level.
I do like the idea also that where Geordi's character in Elementary Dear Data, was saying to Data how he's only, and that doctor too was saying like he's only succeeding because he knows everything that happened. And then Geordi was saying, but we really, you don't necessarily need to change this a little bit. And I think that that's kind of how people sometimes think of history, right? We don't know. We think we know, but we really don't. And like you said, Bianca, we're kind of putting on our own lens when we're portraying these stories or interpreting these stories. And we have to sort of remind ourselves that we are doing that.
Yeah. I mean, like, and also it's kind of like whose view are we looking at things through?
Yeah.
Because if one thing with the holodeck is that there's always an author of the holodeck. There's, or the holonovel. There's always someone who wrote the story. So for instance, in Fairhaven, it's Tom Paris he was the author. And this is a through line in the Voyager series that he is often the one who is, writing, the story that people are involved in. But that also means you're looking at it from his perspective. Why are they in Ireland and not Scotland, not Ghana, not Japan? Also what would Japan look like through the eyes of Tom Paris? I fear to think, but it's these are I love that comment. History is told by those left standing. And that's also becomes the official quote unquote history.
Yeah.
Often, or at least those who win get told, who get the official story.
Yeah.
Those who don't but still survive get the underground story, and they're like, let me tell you what really happened.
Yeah.
And those are the hardest ones to get across to people that are real, the people who like are really set in like, well, but this thing's been written about, so it must be real. Like it must be just this story. And I think like literally like the big thing in period drama is in those communities is yes, Black people existed, like, and people just being like, well, I didn't see them in these things. And it's like, yeah, because history whitewashes, just like making your own stories on the holodeck can be selective based on what you want and your ideas of history.
Yeah, that ties in really nicely.
On Voyager. I was like the B'Elanna memory episode.
Ooh, yes.
I'm like, you should watch that. That's also relevant.
But that comment ties in so nicely to past tense as well, right? Yeah. Like, because the people in the sanctuary cities did not get their story told. You know, everybody else was meant to believe, well, why are they complaining? Why are they rioting? Everything is perfect. You are hearing what they want you to believe. You know, and that's why that episode is so powerful, because like, I mean, we could give so many examples of how that is currently happening now in 2021. And that's why that episode hit so hard.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right, I think we have time for maybe one more question. So I have kind of like a broader question for you all. So with streaming services, shorter seasons, serialized series, there's less space really in many of these dramas for these kind of like one-off episodic adventures that do delve into these type of works. So do you think something gets lost when we don't give series the space or the time to explore these ideas that aren't necessarily directly involved with the main plot?
I will say I think there are pros and cons of both, right? I mean, I feel like I, in one method, prefer the episodic episodes. I feel like that's the Trek I grew up with. That's the Trek I come to enjoy. And I feel like, yes, you're right. When you have these kinds of episodic series, you can take one or two episodes to kind of go, you know, veer off the beaten path and explore these ideas. But then you kind of lose a little bit of the continuity of the bigger story. I'm not sure if there's a way to do that, to do these kinds of things where you can kind of, you know, veer off a little bit off the main plot in serialized shows. I mean, I think it would take a little bit more thought, but I for one prefer the episodic way.
Yeah, like for me, the episodes that stick out to me of like things like Doctor Who or the episodic thing, like these kind of capsule episodes that were just like, you know, whether we're doing Van Gogh or like other things, like there was the more recent like India Pakistan episode, like there are still ways to make these stories super powerful, still connect to characters that you are, you know, you've built a relationship with along the way. I think that like there are some really interesting ways that you could explore non-Western histories. I think like to me that's the big glaring thing. It's like we can explore non-white people histories too, and like spaces. And I think that like to me like those are so strong because you build a strong relationship with those characters, and those are the stories that you're going to put on again and again, I feel like. And whether there's a space or not, I hope that people do remember, like when you're in the writer's room or when you're making the budgets for these things, what were the stories that stuck with you when you were watching these things? The stories that, you know, when you did your marketing pitch for this show, you're like, we want to be like this show. What of those episodes stuck out to you? Were they these kind of capsule stories? Then maybe make space for those and see how they work and how they do. Like, I'd say like there's even like some Mandalorian, like the Mandalorian, I think there are even some episodes there that you could argue are a little bit capsule in their own way that I think stick with people and like hit them differently. And I think like that's just a really interesting way to also just explore your characters.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at Blog Track had this great comment talking about how most period pieces completely ignore the LGBT community, you know, which is why some people talk about being gay is a modern trend, because much of the history has indeed been from the POV of cis males. I mean, exactly. and then thinking about like, no, now, not now that we know this, but that is something that is true. That is something that has been a part of the way media and the way that like history itself has been presented. And now that there's, hopefully more space to tell the stories that people have, scrunched down for so long, we want those stories out there. I know Wilson Cruz was talking about, I'm on Discovery, as a Black Afro-Latino man, something that I feel like Trek was late on.
Yeah.
But he's like, I'm here. And that still matters so much here, and it being kind of, canon in this universe, that, ideally was meant to be diverse, meant to celebrate various cultures. And I know one thing that I feel is very important about Trek, even though of course it absolutely doesn't get everything right, not at all.
Yeah.
But that ideal, IDIC, why we're here, that ideal is baked into the cake of the series, of the franchise. And that's how we are, we hopefully can move forward with something that even when we go all the way back to the original series, we can see we can see what they were going for, even if they weren't always successful.
They tried.
You can. They're so cute.
They're like, you tried. But it's great though. And not that there aren't definitely themes that you can absolutely glean from that. Like I really felt, going back to Sitting on the Edge of Forever and Spectre of the Gun, with us kind of starting there. There were some themes that they hit on that I was like, oh wow, this is I'm kind of feeling this here. Definitely not with every detail, but they're just like, when I think about like the overarching view, I'm like,
Yeah, Spectre of the Gun, I was surprised. I was just like, wow. I don't know, the theme, I got more from that, like, it was like a self-pep talk in a way, right? The part where you're like, if it's not real, something's not real, it cannot hurt you. Don't let it get to you. It's a mind game. And how many of us play mind games with ourselves constantly, And so that, I just hung off on that on Spectre of the Gun. I was like, wow, yes.
Yeah,
I need a reminder.
And not only that, thinking about, McCoy's constant, issues with Spock, super problem. That being said, in order to survive their ideal, they had to adapt their way of thinking to that of a different culture.
Yeah. And they have to have faith. Like that was the key, right? That's what Spock was saying. There's like, there cannot be one itty bitty sense of doubt, because then you will die. Because there's still that little part of you that believes it is true, right? And so I don't know. That just really, either that hit me in the moment because I needed it, but whatever it was, I was just like, that is so true. Like, there's so many things that we let like literally bring us down that they're like, they really don't even need to, and we're just like need to talk ourselves the right way. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think I mean, like I love that she's like, it hit me in the moment where I needed it, which I feel like is like a thing that I know I find sometimes when I'm just, flipping through channels and Trek happens to be on, and sometimes it hits me in the moment when I need it, whether it's I needed a comfort, or I needed a joke, or there was a storyline that just hit me then. And actually, I want to end with this question that we just got from Trek Table, that says, the idea of Trek in IDIC, so that's infinite diversity in infinite combinations, has always been a part of my own disconnect about why do you say the ideal but not show us the fully fleshed out ideal, which I think is fair. But I also feel, I feel personally that almost reminds me of like the Declaration of Independence, to be honest.
Yeah.
you know, there are many words that are said about justice and equality and fairness. And I feel like humans mess it up all the goddamn time.
Oh yeah.
But and I do various like social justice work, and what I always bring out as like when it comes to this work, I always say I subscribe to the data theory. The data theory is this: data is an android. Data will never be human. Never, ever, ever, ever. Yeah. But he keeps on working. He keeps on working harder. He keeps on connecting. He keeps on trying. And it is in that journey. Yeah. And it's in that journey that he is the most human. So I don't think we'll be able to reach the ideal, but I think we can continue to be better humans.
Yeah. And I know we're a little bit, we're probably have like zero time, but I feel like that was what I got from almost all of these episodes, right? It showed us these aspects of humanity that are not necessarily what we want to showcase, but in the end, it was always good versus evil. And in the end, they always found a way to make the good work, right? So that's what we have to strive for.
Any thoughts, Bianca, before we say goodbye?
I think too, in that it's a lot of like understanding yourself and your place in all of it, and understanding the lessons that you can learn through that growth. But yeah, this was really good. Thank you for this sampler platter of Trek. No, thank you for a certain intro song. I will just say that.
Well, thank you everyone for being a part of this, for joining us on this journey. We were really excited to talk about this and delve in these episodes. Please enjoy the rest of the festival. You can find us on our various social medias, me at Interspectional, Bianca at Book Hoarding. You can find Luce at
Luce X-Ray MD.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the festival.
Thanks.